And I did get the okay from Rick to record, and just so everybody else knows about this and stuff. This is our monthly call for our informatics rehab collaborative group. And yes, many of us will be at CSM next week. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. I think you saw the agenda that we sent around. We have a speaker, Rick Black, who's going to speak first, and then we're going to go into just a few different updates related to CSM next week to make sure we have those in there, and then just open up to any other topics. I will also share that after Rick goes through some of his stuff, there will be time for question and answer, both on the process as well as about any of the data that he has pulled together. I've known Rick Black for many, many years. I certainly consider him a friend, a very, very knowledgeable one. And I've known Rick through the National Association of Support to Long-Term Care, now called Advion. He is the Corporate Rehabilitation Director with ProMedica, and ProMedica has, gosh, Rick, you guys have had 150, 200 nursing homes. I forget how many it's been over the years.
We had that.
Yeah.
These days, but yes.
Yeah, and then you went through a change where you acute care came in with you as well, right, into your organization. And so, and I wanted to mention that because I think that it ties in a little bit with some of the research that you did, but it also ties in with some of the topics that we talk about here about this data continuum. I do want to share, Rick was a Learned Scholar. Several of us have listened into other Learned speakers present their data in the past. I had the opportunity last year at our Advion meeting. Rick gave a similar presentation where he talked a little bit about the process of becoming one of the Learned Scholars. And again, he's going to tell us more about that, as well as sharing data and et cetera. Rick, whenever it works with you, I'm going to turn it over. You can add further into that bio. Okay. I guess I just want everybody to know he's certainly a wealth of knowledge. Rick?
All right, let me go ahead and let me share my screen here. And let's see if I can get that full screen for you. Okay, so I thought what I would talk about, it sounded like from my discussions with Bob that there was interest in learning, talking more about the process kind of that I've gone through to do this research, and not talk as much about the research itself, but if you want me to discuss some specifics on it, I can do that. And so I wanted to, I had given a presentation, I think Bob mentioned in October at the combination Advion HCA conference, kind of talking about my journey as a LHS scholar. And so this is actually kind of building upon that in a sense, because lots and lots of stuff are happening. So I wanted to talk to you about my experience with building infrastructure. And so if you guys have any questions, you know, we could save it till the end, or if something comes up in the middle, you know, just speak up, and let's keep this pretty casual, and I can try to answer any questions that you may have. So as Bob mentioned, so I am part of the Learning Health Systems Rehabilitation Research Network. And as part of that, I work really closely with Linda Resnick, who is on faculty at Brown University and is a very accomplished researcher. Work closely with Dan Scholak from the American Healthcare Association. And in fact, I'm collaborating with the American Healthcare Association. And then I am working closely with a statistician out of Bowling Green State University. And if you're not familiar with Learn, this is an NIH-funded collaborative between Boston University, University of Pittsburgh, and Brown University. And it is to develop researchers with the skills necessary to do learning health systems research. And so I'm going to talk more about that experience, but but I'm going to kind of lead you up to what led me to do that in the beginning. So, and it was interesting. Just recently, there's so much happening in regards to this research that even I'm kind of blown away with how much has happened recently. And so it took a long time to develop the capacity to do this, but now that it's in place, it just seems like opportunities are opening up all the time. So I just wanted to start with that because it can be a little discouraging at first, and you'll see as I talk through some of the slides, it really did take a long time, but once everything is set up in place, then you can respond very quickly and to issues and questions that come up. So I've been working on functional outcomes with older adults for years and years. And Bob was talking a little bit. I am with ProMedica now, and kind of a timeline of that. About 4 or 5 years ago, I've worked for HER Manor Care for over 20 years. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we were purchased by ProMedica, and ProMedica is a regional healthcare system. And they bought, at that time, we had about 270 skilled nursing facilities around the country. And then we became part of ProMedica, and ProMedica has the entire continuum. So we have acute care hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, assisted living, outpatient home health. Anyway, as part of HER Manor Care, we had been capturing FIM-based outcomes for many, many years, but there were a lot of challenges with that in terms of it was kind of added on to our regular documentation workload. So people were inconsistent about doing it. So there were just a lot of challenges about getting really high quality data that we could use. And as I said, I've been working on this functional outcome issue for many years. So back in 2012 or 2013, it started in 2012 actually, there was a collaborative between what was then the National Association for Supported Long-Term Care and AHCA. And what we tried to do, CMS was trying to develop functional measures for post-acute care, and they were using items from the CARE tool as a library to do some of this. And in particular, they were interested in the function items out of the CARE tool. And so what we wanted to do was we pulled a group of large skilled nursing facility providers together, and we tried to build a crosswalk. Well, we did build a crosswalk between the proprietary outcome systems that each organization was using and the CARE tool functional items. And CMS was very actively involved in that process. So they were at our meetings, we worked together on that. And that was kind of leading up to when the Impact Act, so this is prior to the Impact Act, but this is some of the stuff I think, some of that research, I like to think that it helped move that process forwards and influenced CMS's thinking on it. Around that same time, I was also on a CMS technical expert panel looking at cross-setting functional outcomes, so providing them feedback as they were trying to figure out how to implement functional outcomes in post-acute care. And then all along, Bob mentioned our work with NASL, which is now called Avion, and we were advocating for the Impact Act. And I devote a whole slide to the Impact Act just because, at least for my work, this was really pivotal, I think, because what it did is it aligned everybody's incentives. So the government set regulatory requirements in terms of objective functional measures that had to be incorporated into the assessment tools of the different post-acute care environments, which means that providers had to respond and provide that information. Software vendors had to facilitate the capture of this information, so they had to respond to what their customers, the providers, needed. And in the process, it created this massive amount of data that researchers could begin to use to answer what I think are important questions. And so once the Impact Act, so those of you who've been following along with that was signed into law in October of 2014. Skilled nursing facilities had to begin capturing these data in 2016. And so I spent a number of years part of the team I'm on provides support for the skilled nursing facilities. And so we have to take these regulatory policies and convert regulatory requirements and convert that into policies and procedures, systems within our centers in order to capture this information. It took several years to be able to capture the data electronically. I mean, at the start in 2016, we were writing those section GG scores on a piece of paper, and then they were entered into an electronic system after. So, it's really hard to aggregate the data and look at it when you're managing it that way. And then once we started capturing it electronically, we had to figure out, well, how do we get the data out of the system? And that's a challenge too. I mean, the rehab department isn't always at the top of the list for our IT department. So that was challenges, but I worked through those things and I started getting data back and I began to do some preliminary analyses. So I won't go over this timeline too much, but basically, talking about building this infrastructure in which I'd be able to actually answer questions that I think are important. It took years, right? And it started before the Impact Act, and it actually continues to this day, right? But building the infrastructure, the basic database files that I received, that took a while, and I worked really closely with one of our external vendors. So we use SHP. And they help us to process our MDS data, right? So we get various reports from SHP in regards to the MDS. And when I talked to them about what I was looking for, they were really open to creating a database with the information that I wanted. And to begin with, the data file contained the section GG information. It contains some PDPM information and some of the quality reporting information. But over time, and I can talk more about that, we really expanded that data file. But the hard part was getting it created in the first place. And so, once I had this data file, I'm getting on a regular basis, I'm getting these large data files, basically all patients with Medicare Part A from all centers. So again, when this started, we're talking about 270 centers. It's a lot of data. I had the functional information, as I said. I had some PDPM data, some MDS, but not a ton. And I started doing some predictive modeling with that. So, just knowing what a person's function is on admission, you can predict pretty well what their function will be like at discharge. So I started doing some simple modeling and trying to figure out length of stay based on what the rate of change in function was for particular centers. So kind of simple modeling, but I got started, but I realized, I was going to need some assistance because it was getting more complicated and I wanted to do it right. So I felt like I needed additional guidance. And that's where the Learn came in. And so if you haven't had a chance to find out about Learn, I strongly encourage you to do it. So the way that Learn has a number of different programs, but one of them are the Learning Health System Scholar Program. And that's where they match up a scholar with a mentor to help guide their research program. There's a small amount of funding for it. It's pretty small. The thing that really attracted me to this was the mentorship. And that's been incredibly valuable. And then, so as I looked at that program, there was a couple of different things. One, I looked at the different health system partners, and I realized they have a list of what their research priorities are. And I realized that the work I was doing on my own was really in alignment with what the American Healthcare Association was interested in. And I've worked with the American Healthcare Association for a long time, and I reached out to them to see whether my perception, if they felt that my perception that the work we're doing and what they were looking for were that there was a good fit between it, and they agreed. Another advantage that in order to receive the grant funding from Learn, you have to be at an organization that can get NIH funding. Now, before I was with ProMedica, when we were HCR Manor Care, that was a private company, and we were not set up to do NIH research. But ProMedica has an affiliation with the University of Toledo Medical School. And so they've got an academic component. And so as part of this organization, I was able to obtain NIH funding. So that was really critical for me in being able to obtain a Learn grant and become one of the scholars. So kind of the steps in that process. So there are things I had to do beforehand. And one was ensuring that we could accept NIH funding. And I had to make sure that everybody was on board in the organization. So I reached out to our chief medical officer, obviously my direct supervisor, and she's been super supportive of the whole process, the chief medical officer, the legal department. So I made sure that people were going to be supportive, that the institution was going to be supportive. I got all of that. And I applied, and I was accepted for the grant. And as I mentioned earlier, I was paired up with Linda Resnick out of Brown University and Dan Scholek from the American Healthcare Association. So that started back in 2021. And then from there, we had regular meetings where I shared with them what I was working on. And we really worked to develop, first of all, a conceptual framework for the entire project, kind of build the project around, and then more specifics into the research design. And with their help, they really raised the level of the research significantly. And in one way is related to this next item, expanding the data variables. So, as I showed them the data file, they're like, well, it's pretty good, but it lacked a lot of demographic information. And it lacked a lot of clinical information that is located in the MDS. And so, I reached back out to our vendor, SHP, and I said, is it possible to expand this data file and give me more variables? They said, sure, tell us what you want. So, we probably added 30 or 40 variables. And at that time, I tried to add a lot of the variables that CMS had used for their risk adjustment model when they developed the function quality measures for post-acute care. So now I've got this data file that's greatly expanded, has a lot of clinical information, has demographic information, it has therapy services information, mostly minutes and carved up in any number of different ways, PDPM information. So now I've got a really sizable data file. And that kind of led to the next problem, managing all that data. And again, that's where my mentor's experience really was helpful. They said, you really need to find a data programmer, because when you're dealing with files this big, people use data programmers to clean and process the data. And it turned out that in another area of the company, there was a group that was primarily focusing on the acute care side. And when I talked to them about what I was doing, they were really excited about it. And they were excited about, yes, the questions I was interested in, but they also saw the potential of taking the data that we had and linking it across the continuum. So linking it up to the acute care side. So I was able to work with a data programmer who assisted me in processing and cleaning the data. And then, as I mentioned, in this organization, they have an academic affiliation with the University of Toledo Medical School. So they have an IRB, and when I reached out to that group, they were super helpful in that there was a lot of resources within the organization that I didn't know about. And one was the IRB. So I actually was able to get my project approved through the IRB. So I had IRB approval. They also linked me up to some consultants they worked with, and that kind of leads to that last item, the data analysis. So, with all these variables, those are extremely complex analyses. And so there is a statistician from a local university who they have historically worked with. And I reached out to him. He was excited about the work I was trying to do. And so I work with him to help do a lot of the analyses. So, you know, what's really happened over this time period is I've been able to create this whole research team here. And so things have really, you know, come together. We've got the clinicians are gathering the data through their ordinary documentation process. So to them, it's invisible. I've got the software vendors who have been great about feeding me the data, expanding the data file as I need it. And I can talk some more about that after if you want. A data programmer, I lost my initial data programmer, but I found another person who's got those skills. I've got the IRB, and in fact, I'm working right now to amend my current proposal because there's another project I want to submit a grant for. So I need to expand my current IRB. We also have a grant department. Now, the grant department of this hospital system was more related to philanthropic type of grants. However, they were equipped for NIH grants. And so I did submit another grant proposal, and they were super helpful with that and helpful with me managing my current grant. So the LHS Scholar is still an NIH grant. I'm a subrecipient, and there's a lot of steps in managing one of those grants. And that grant department helped me to do that. Our legal department has been helpful in ensuring that I have appropriate data use agreements with the outside statistician and the university. You know, I've got that resource. My mentors have been unbelievable. Learn itself. If for those of you, if you haven't participated in it, I strongly recommend it. Even if you don't try to become a scholar, they put on education sessions, and every year there's kind of a different theme. So this year is more extracting data from electronic health records, and they get the top researchers from around the country to discuss those issues. Last year, they had a lot related to implementation science, which was great just to see all the work that different researchers are doing in the area of implementation science. And then the other LHS scholars, I mean, all of them are on faculty. I'm one of the few that is an embedded scholar. And that has had definite advantages for me in terms of being access to the data. But they're all accomplished researchers, have great ideas, and we learn a lot just seeing what they're working on, or bouncing ideas off of them, or sharing information. And then, as I mentioned, I have access to an outside consultant. So this kind of, I just wanted to circle back to that very first slide where I talked about the exponential growth, because just recently, so much has been happening with this project that I'm really kind of blown away. So right now, from kind of my little tiny project built that my database that I first built, and then getting the LHS scholarship. Right now, I'm working on a manuscript that's looking at the relationship between whether a patient reaches the expected discharge function and the likelihood that they'll be discharged to the community. From my initial LHS Scholar program, I've got a couple of different projects that I'm getting data for right now. I'm building a prediction model for predicting discharge function based on the patient's admission characteristics, predicting discharge to community based on admission characteristics, and then looking at both discharge function and discharge to community based on the treatments that patient receives over the course of their care. So those are things directly related to my current funding for the LHS Scholar Program. And I'm teaming up with a researcher out from the University of Washington, Rachel Przinski, and we've just submitted a letter of intent. Learn also has 2-year pilot program grants. which they're 2-year grants that are, I think they're $45,000. So what happened was, with this, CMS just recently announced that they're looking at a potential replacement for the functional quality measures that are used in post-acute care. And they're working with Acumen to develop that measure. So this is a great opportunity to look almost in real time. I mean, as CMS is looking at it, I realized that I could replicate that measure with just 1 or 2 more variables in my data file. And then by adding additional clinical measures out of the MDS, I could replicate CMS's risk adjustment model that they apply to function. So we were able, this is kind of what I was saying before, once you build the infrastructure, then you can move on this stuff quickly. So we were able to get those data variables added to the file. I've got the data file, it still needs to be processed, but I've got it. And now I'm just waiting to see whether I get accepted to submit a grant for that. And I'm finding some local grants in Ohio that I think my same data file, I can answer some important questions with that. And I think they're appropriate for those grants. So I'm looking at that. And we didn't specifically, I may have mentioned it earlier in the talk, but ProMedica is in the process of getting out of the skilled nursing facility business. And so the buildings I supported are in the process of being sold. However, the third-party vendor, SHP, has been really interested in the work that I've been doing, and they've been super supportive. And they are open to trying to continue to provide me a data feed. We still have to work through the details of that. We're just in preliminary talks to see how that might work. But my point is, all of these things have kind of like sprouted out, and it's happened actually pretty quickly. So I took up about a half hour here. I don't know if you guys have questions about that or.
Rick, first, I do have a couple of questions, but first I want to say very awesome and thank you for going through that process. And I do want to make sure everybody else has opportunity to ask questions. I want to bring up a comment you were just describing about Medicare and being able to replicate what they are doing, because they're using that to actually create policy, which applies to all of us in these post-acute care settings. But they do that, and we're usually blind to all of that. So if I hear you, we might be able to, in essence, pull back the curtain and check, one, if their data is accurate, or if it is influenced by certain geographical regions versus others, or by some other things. I guess, in other words, we can use that for advocacy purposes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That would be huge. That would just be amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's why HCA is interested in it. So since HCA is supporting me, there are deliverables that I'm going to be providing to HCA. And for that particular question, for that letter of intent, the questions we want to answer, they're twofold. One, there's not a lot of research looking at the relationship between discharge function and discharge to community. And yet those are super important measures. And in fact, CMS is adding successful discharge to community to the value-based program in 2026, right? They just announced that in this year's final rule. So that's a really important measure. And yet there's not a lot of data looking at that relationship. So that's one question. But then the other question is, so we have the self-care function, discharge function score, and the mobility discharge function score. Now this, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the measure that CMS is proposing, but Acumen is working, what they've done is they've taken a couple of elements from the self-care and a few elements from the mobility items, and they want to combine them into one measure, right? So that would, instead of having a self-care and a mobility, you would have this mixed, it would be a single measure, and it would require less data elements. So the question is, well, is it better than what we have now, right? And so we're going to look, does it, first of all, does discharge function predict discharge to community? That's one question. And then the second question is, of those three measures of discharge function, is one better than the other? Or is this new one an improvement? If it's not an improvement, then is it worth making that transition, right? So Bob, to your point, it has direct policy ramifications, because imagine if we find it's not better, is it worth all the effort transitioning to a new measure if it doesn't work as well? Or maybe it does, and maybe it's worthwhile because in the long run, maybe it will reduce provider burden. I don't know. But that's the project related to, for that, the letter of intent I just submitted to see if I could get that grant funding.
And Matt Elrod, I'm looking at you a little bit because this ties into the Passio project. The other piece though, Rick, you talked a little bit about the acute care to post-acute. Did you map any of like the MPAC or 6 clicks or any of the measures collected on acute across? No, not yet.
No, we haven't. But so what we did with this data file, Bob, we added the Medicare number. And with the Medicare number, we could begin to link the patients across the continuum. So I haven't done it yet, and I've been talking to people about the possibility of doing it. We just haven't done it, but we built a framework so it could be done. So absolutely, because we want to be able to follow these patients. Before, we could just look in the skilled nursing facility side, but now and since we have the continuum, we could follow those patients across the continuum. But I'm very interested. A lot of the questions, like the predictive modeling I'm doing using admission data, I feel like I could replicate that stuff with 6 clicks, because our acute care side uses 6 clicks. So I feel like there's a lot of variables at discharge on the acute care side that I could replicate these predictive models that I'm trying to do. Does Stephen have his hand raised, Stephen?
Yes, he does. Yep. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah. So this is interesting, and it just two things. One, so did you look at on the post-acute care side with your predictive models, or did you look just at SNFs, or did you look at other facilities as question number one? And then just a comment on number two, the question that Bob just asked. So Intermountain has just formed a partnership, research partnership. When I say partnership, I mean, this is just, we're working on a project with Cleveland Clinic, Josh Johnson and that group to look at exactly what Bob just said with the 6 clicks AMPAC as a discharge predictor for home versus acute care. So Kate Minnick, I think you know Kate, Rick, because she works with Learn, but she's involved in this along with Josh, and we're just in the initial phases, just had 2 or 3 meetings, but just for your information, if that is something that would interest you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the timing is great, because I met yesterday with the person who heads it's a vascular surgeon who heads our research group. So it's a small group, but they do have a research group here at the organization. And he was particularly interested in creating and looking at some of these predictive models going back into the acute care data. So there's definitely an interest here. So if you want to reach out, that would be great. I mean, the timing is really good, and I think people are interested. I'm certainly interested, but I think the organization as a whole is interested in doing some of those things as well.
Thanks.
Very cool. Questions from others for Rick? Go ahead, Matt. I see your hand up. We can't hear you, Matt. Sorry. You might be double muted. I still can't. Oh, you'll call in on the phone. Okay. Sounds good. While Matt's getting connected, any other questions that came up from anybody else? And I'm going to ask one. Okay, Sam, go ahead.
I have a quick question. Thank you so much, Rick. This is amazing work that you're doing. And I know very little about post-acute care, but this is something that even just discharged to outpatient, what happens? It's the same type of transitional care problem that we see. I'm just wondering if you can shed some for most of our new audience or even some of the existing audience, I'm wondering if you can shed a little bit about, especially within the Learn Scholar program, where how much of a research did you have before you applied, and two, role, how much of your role have changed as a result of going through this scholar program?
Right. So, okay. So my background, so I have an advanced, so you can tell my age. I have an advanced master's, in it. My PT degree is a bachelor's degree. Then I got an advanced master's degree a long time ago. And then I got the transitional DPT. So, but my master's degree is a research degree. And I did do research. So I used to work in the Duke Center for Aging and Human Development, and I was working off of Pepper grants, doing biomechanical research related to Parkinson's disease, which I don't know if you know Margaret Shankman, but Margaret is a really accomplished researcher who was at Duke at that time. And I worked in Margaret's lab. While I was writing my master's thesis, I was doing research at Duke. I then went to Wake Forest, and I was just tangentially involved in a Pepper grant, and also did some work. Now, back then, they were creating the Excite trial, which was Stephen Wolf's trial related to constraint-induced movement therapy. And we were a site there, so I was involved in those things. So I had some experience in research, and I had a strong interest in it. And then I came to HR Manor Care, and I did a lot. I was doing research internally, but we weren't equipped as an organization to do like grant funded work. So that was kind of my background. So all along I was applying research principles to business issues and clinical issues within the organization, but I wasn't doing anything formalized, like other than the work I mentioned with AHCA and NASL, where we actually, built a crosswalk between our proprietary outcomes and the care tool function items.
Very cool. Matt, I think you said that you got your mic working. I'm going to go
Let's see.
there.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Yep.
Rick, do you mind going back to your slide where you were showing your data elements you're capturing? I have a quick question.
It
was kind of generic.
Do you want to? I have another. I could tell you the exact variables in one of my models. If I want me to switch my screen, would that be helpful?
Well, let me just make my generic question, and then you can decide from there.
Okay.
So one of the pieces of work that I'm really involved in is kind of the computer understandable aspect of a data element. So let's say it's an MDS data element. Does the computer have a codable concept behind, not just what the clinician sees of the number, but it's something a computer can process? So, for example, the care item, they have LOINC codes that are assigned to them, those types of things. When you guys are doing your research and when you're taking those data elements, I guess it's kind of two questions. One is, are you taking those data elements as codifiable pieces of information using data standards, or are you using, words that are commonly captured and kind of bringing that information in? I'm just trying to get into the dirt a little bit about that data format and your structure.
Well, let's see if I can answer that. So the data file I get reflects what was entered in the MDS item. So if you looked at the MDS scoring, let's say the item is a 0 to 4 scale, or the function items, the 1 to 6 scale, and then there's also if the item was not tested, right? Then my data file, I get the actual number, or if the item was blanked out, or if it was a not tested score, I get that information in my data file.
So then the data that you're receiving, it was would be from what's on the MDS form, not necessarily what a therapist ranked the individual or what a physical therapist ranked it over a period of time, or the occupational therapist or the nurses. It's a cumulative score of a 3-day look back.
Yes, but the way we the way we have internally operationalized that, the items that make up if therapy is involved, and therapy is involved in the majority of cases, well over 90%, if therapy is involved during the 3-day window on admission or a discharge, then if OT is involved, they capture the self-care and they score it in our system, and it flows over to PCC. Now that doesn't mean it's final. Somebody could alter it if the team gets together and says, well, we don't agree what OT put in there, that it can be changed before that MDS is locked. And likewise, the mobility, if physical therapy is involved in either the first 3 days of the stay or the last 3 days, then the physical therapist is the one who's scoring the mobility items. If therapy is not involved, then nursing scores those items. That's how we've operationalized it. Now, regardless, therapy is really doing it as part of their evaluation. So it is a snapshot in time. And that's why there is always the opportunity, if that doesn't reflect what their usual performance was over that 3-day period of time, then the interdisciplinary team can change what goes on to the MDS. But in most instances, what therapy enters into our system is what ends up on the MDS. So I would say in most instances, our data really reflects what the therapist saw on admission and discharge.
So I'm going to step in just for a moment. And Matt, if there's further questions with that, please follow up with Rick separately. I just want to give Ching a chance to ask her question, and then I want to go through some of the stuff from CSM. So Ching.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for the presentation. Oh, sorry, I lost my voice. Sorry. My question is kind of like more personal question about the Lean Scholar, because I heard this program before, and then but I consulted with my kind of like a mentor. They all said that, yeah, this is a program for people being experienced researcher versus like a junior researcher. You haven't had a publication yet. You have to, I heard you said that it's good experience to have a mentor there to guide you and help you to clean data. But the problem is for like basically my question is, how can I prepare myself to apply for the Lean Scholar? Because I don't have the experience, I don't have the access to data, I have an interest, I want to get a mentor, I want to be successful in this mentorship, but how can I apply? They discourage me. Sometimes I email them, I email to the program and ask them, can I apply? And they said, oh, you don't have a PhD, so usually not. And you don't have publication, usually not. But I feel like this is an opportunity for junior researchers to get like a experience. So I just want to kind of like ask your experience or suggestion, how can I prepare myself to apply for it?
Right. Gee, well, I hope I didn't spoil it for you. I probably was one of the first without a PhD to actually get it. So, but I wouldn't, I wouldn't let that discourage you. I mean, for me, I think part of the reason why they selected me, despite the fact that I don't have a PhD, is because I do have access to the data, and that's a huge issue. So I'd strongly encourage you to partner with some health organization so that you could get access to the data, because it's been interesting to see how the scholars are moving along. And a lot of the scholars, it takes a year to establish the relationship with an organization. And then if you're in healthcare, we don't just give out data. I mean, there's all kinds of rules. So people just don't share data that openly for a lot of good reasons, but it's hard. So I wouldn't, I mean, again, I'm not on the selection committee, but I wouldn't get discouraged that you don't have your PhD. But I think access to the data is really critical. And if you could find a partner who has the data, I think that that makes a stronger case. I know for me, I think it made a difference for me. I had already built, even before I applied for the scholarship program, I built the data files. Granted, it evolved over the course of the project, but the fundamental building it, I built it before I applied. And I had access to the data, and I know it was huge because a lot of my colleagues in my cohort really struggled to get data. That they're all accomplished researchers. Most of them, they're in academic positions, but they really need data. So there's lots of opportunities. I would really seek somebody out who has data that you can partner with.
I would just add on to that, and I think it's great points, Rick. But the other part is you've had a passion for this. You started it ahead of time. You had an idea of what you wanted to do. And I think all of those pieces maybe help out along the process. I don't know because I've never been that scholar, but I do know that if we have somebody who, has done a little bit and they want to do more, it's a whole lot easier to understand where they're going and help them get there. I don't know, thoughts, but I do want to thank you very much, Rick. Really, really appreciate this. I want to switch a little bit and talk just a little bit about CSM because it is next week. And if you are attending CSM, if you just want to put a note in the chat. Yes, Rick, thank you. I see hands going up. Great job. All of very much. If you're attending CSM, if you just want to make a note in the chat box, just say yes or yes, I'll be there, anything along those lines. In the announcement for today's call, I sent over a few different things that were going on, and we just wanted to repeat these verbally just so that everybody is aware. One of the big ones is this group. We asked for a time to get together at CSM. The room and the date is on Saturday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. It is right after a presentation that several of us are doing just before that from 8 to 10, Careers That Matter, Informatics and Rehabilitation. And so the room number, though, I couldn't find that. I'll get that around to everybody, but just want to let everybody know we have the presentation from 8 to 10. Right after that, from 10 to 11, we have an opportunity to get together. No set agenda per se. It's more of a, getting to see people in 3D format instead of in a 2D Zoom screen. It is also talking a little bit about where else we want this group to go over the next year and maybe just putting some of those ideas into play. A couple of other things on Wednesday afternoon. If anybody is interested, you have to complete the form, fill it out by the 20th on Monday. But we have an opportunity to tour the Naval Rehab Research Center in San Diego, and they blocked out a time slot from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. The tours, she said that they normally are about 45 minutes, could be an hour. If you ask questions, it could be longer, but you basically have your opportunity to go in and out during that time. So if you fill out the form, you would sign up for a time slot. After that, they are doing a no-host social from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at a local brewery. And I didn't put where it is because I didn't have it with me as I was putting this together. There is a link to a video of their lab from a couple of years back that she had sent over. In that time slot as well, from 4 to 5 p.m. on that Wednesday is the first council meeting. That's Foundations in Rehabilitation Science and Technology. And so if anybody's interested in that, that goes on, and I did put it at the Hilton Bayfront. On Thursday from 11 to 1, there's a presentation following the patient journey, data collection and value across the continuum. Stephen, I think you're one of the presenters with that, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I am. And I think the highlight of that is we have our data analyst, Devin Woodfield, who's going to be there and talk about data analytics, visualization. Some of you know Devin, he's very, very good. So that's kind of a different approach because he's not a therapist, but comes about it from a real informatics side. And so yeah, thanks for highlighting that. That's in the Bayfront. That's in the Hilton.
Yep. And as you're talking about that data visualization, I think sometimes the way data is shared is as important as the data that we collect, because the meaning sometimes is understood differently depending upon how it's visualized or presented. I don't know if that's something you've found, or Rick or others, but
absolutely, and that'll be included in this presentation, especially where we're trying to get behavior change, from our providers. That the way they see the data is what helps them drive. Oh, I could do better here, or I am doing well in this area. So yeah, I would totally agree.
huge. So it's kind of neat hearing about that. Thank you, Stephen. Other things on that Thursday is the Technology Special Interest Group for the Academy of Leadership and Innovation. That's also at the Hilton Bayfront. And all of these, the room numbers I put on what was sent around. So on Thursday, 3 to 5, there's a Clinical Research Networks, Data to Knowledge from Clinical Practice. And somebody here was on that panel. I forget who. Anyway, that's going on there. Friday morning, 10 to 11 a.m., the Beyond Clinical Practice Catalyst Group is getting together for their meeting. If anybody wants to attend that, or et cetera. These are individuals who are in roles outside of the clinical setting, including several that are in informatics, others that are working for tech organizations. But that's essentially what that group is. On Friday from 4:45 to 5:30. If anyone here is interested, I need to receive from you looking for 12 physical therapists to essentially be in a focus group. They're going to do 3 different focus groups with 4 people in each of the focus groups. But it is a group that is doing a technology related to sensors. And they are looking for physical therapists to give them feedback if it's something that's practical, what they like, what they don't like. And part of this is for their grant process. But the other part is something that we as the Tech SIG are trying to figure out how we can encourage physical therapists to be more involved in technology development, all different kinds. And if there's a way to do this with different focus groups, then this is our first time considering this. So again, if you're interested, you would get paid $50 for the time. It would be at the Children's Museum, but that would be Friday from 4:45 to 5:30.
Bob, quick question. Are you accepting students, or do they have to be a licensed physical therapist?
They have to be licensed physical therapists. So at this point. Friday, also the Academy of Leadership and Innovation business meeting goes on from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. That's also the time for setting up for the Technopalooza event. The Technopalooza event goes on from 6:30 to 8:30, and the Party with the Purpose goes on after that and there'll be a half-hour crossover, but from 8 to 11 in the evening. And all of that is happening at the Children's Museum. The question that came up during the Technopalooza, we have 2 additional tables that I have held back, and they're available, if you will. And the question comes up, do we want to have a discussion group? And we did this 4 years ago, 3 years ago in Denver. But do we want to have a discussion group that talks for a short period of time related to informatics? And if so, we put sign up and stuff. I can still add this into the schedule. The other topic that came up was, do we want to talk about AI and Chat GPT for a portion of that time? And if so, is anybody here interested and willing for a portion of that time to be at that table to talk either of these topics?
Go ahead, Matt. We can't hear you. Can you? Still not able to hear.
Okay,
Bob,
ahead,
quick
Sam.
question about those two things. I mean, the chat GPT is a pretty broad, but it could be very specific. Would you be able to share a little bit about what information, like what's the kind of aim and goal of this discussion?
Sure. And just to be clear, at Technopalooza, it's a cocktail table, and it is just a spot where people can gather and network and discuss these topics. I bring up Chat GPT because it's been in the news the last 3 weeks for several different people. So is it a place where we could gather and talk? And I use Chat GPT again because it's in the news, but more for the topic of how does that lead people into even considering or thinking about how AI could or might be used, whether it's in a differential diagnosis process, whether it's in how to revisit a person over time. How could this possibly be used in the clinical setting at a future point in time? I am not a person who understands AI at a great depth. I understand it, but my knowledge level is more shallow. But I'm just thinking that some people walking through might be curious. Can we use AI now? They might even be curious what natural language processing is. They might want to, once we start talking, they may think that, an algorithm is all of it. And I know that it certainly is pieces, but so that's where it comes from. It's just who shows up? Where does the topic go? Is it of interest first?
I'd like to listen to the rest of the group. I'd be very interested, but again, I think I'm not an AI expert per se, but I think there's been a lot of discussions in our institution around ChatGPT, but just overall, the very question that you posed, what would that look like in a clinical world? Happy to facilitate and have roundtable discussion, but again, I want to open up to this group.
In essence, that's what it would be, is just facilitating, having the discussion. And if any of you are walking through Technopalooza, maybe Sam will be at that table and we can discuss it, At least it's a chance to say hi to one another too. A couple of other things that will be at Technopalooza, just so that you have these. We have 2 social robots that'll be there. One that is 4.5 feet tall, the other one that's just over 2 foot tall. Both of these are being deployed in nursing homes in Minnesota. And in those nursing homes, they are using them primarily for individuals with dementia, but they're also using them to lead yoga classes for some groups. They are trying to increase the physical activity of individuals in those settings. So Dr. Khan's going to be there talking about those, and they use AI within those devices. So again, it may tie back to that. We also have a couple of drones that we will be using, Follow Me drones, and we'll talk about how those could be used in clinical settings or could be used to help people identify how to find your clinic and where to park and how to get in the front door, because similar to real estate, you can do some things like that on your website. So again, just a couple of bookmarks on the end of some of the different technologies that we will have there. And maybe a table to discuss these other topics. And I bring up informatics because I do think it's such an important topic that if we could have the discussions more informally, if people just come up, it may encourage even further knowledge there. The other things, again, we have the presentation Saturday morning, 8 to 10 a.m. This group meeting right after that from 10 to 11. And then from 11 to 1, there's a health informatics and PT education, why, what, and how. Sam, I think that's you and Steve and Julie talking through more extensive what we did on one of our calls here. Yes.
Yes, and we also have Annie and Mahia Downs and her husband Stephen Downs, who's a physician. So they'll be joining our panel, as well as Don Magnuson, who's steering out that discussion. Yeah.
Perfect. Any other questions, Matt? I see you just showed your camera. Questions, comments?
Yeah, Bob, I'd be more than happy to help with the informatics discussion. I just have some
Awesome.
overlapping conflicts in my schedule. So if I can get those moved out of the way, Sam, I'd be more than happy to come into the rescue, or at least have another
Awesome.
body there at the table to work on discussion.
That would be great, man. Yeah, we would love to have you there. Yeah.
Is Carrie going to be there with you too?
Yes, yeah, we'll both be
Cool.
there, but unfortunately we have to leave early on Saturday. Not that you need to know my itinerary, but the Saturday events, I'm very upset that I can't attend them because they sound like they're right up my alley. So hopefully somewhere along the line, they'll either be recorded, or maybe we can duplicate some of those presentations here, Sam. That would be really
Yeah.
interesting to see if you can get that panel together here.
Sure.
I
Sound
like it.
Yeah.
And I mentioned Carrie. Carrie is Matt's wife. She helped out with the selection of the learning management system that we are using within the Academy of Leadership and Innovation. I mention that because we're going to be showing that at Technopalooza as well. And I also bring it up because if anybody here wants to put together an electronic course that could be available for members, we can work something out, and we can even do it where it's a whatever gets paid, a portion of that comes back to the person putting it together. We'll find ways to make that work. Okay. I know I went over a few minutes, but wanted to just touch base on those things. Any other questions, comments, feedbacks from anybody related to CSM next week or other topics? If not, thank you all very much. Have a great day and a great week, and see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you so much, Greg.
You guys.
Thank you, Rick.